think we're on here. Do we need to unmute this? Is it working? Yeah, good, thanks. So thanks to Mark and the Center for Infrastructure Protection and Homeland Security for having me, and also to Debbie. I've known Debbie for a number of years, Director of the U.S. Resilience Project, so we're on the same page, and looking forward to sharing with you. I live in New Zealand, I live in the city of Christchurch, and I have done for quite a long time, since the early 1980s, but some of you may be looking at me a little odd and say my accent doesn't sound like it's from New Zealand. And that's true. New Zealand's the home of flightless birds and earthquakes. My original home, though, isn't subject to earthquakes, but it is the home of drive-by shootings. It's not Washington, D.C., though. Sorry, it's Detroit. Although I've been away from Detroit for quite a long time. As Mark said, resilience is the new black. I think that's right. It goes with everything. It's the new buzzword. And for most, it's just this big fuzzy ball. It probably doesn't mean much of anything, really, because it means everything. And I hope to dissuade you of that if that's your thinking. My focus is not going to be on resilience in general, but on organizational resilience. There are lots of kinds of resilience. And one of the reasons why there's so many different definitions. In fact, I was speaking with a friend of mine at a conference in Wellington recently. Well, he was speaking before me. And he was rubbishing the idea of defining resilience, and he was scrolling 129 definitions of resilience up on the screen while he was talking. I was very patient and didn't argue with him. But once I got my turn, I set him straight. As I was reading those 129 definitions scrolling up the screen, one of the things I noticed was they all had 80 or 90% of the same stuff in common. So there aren't really 129 definitions. What you really have is a lot of disciplines and a lot of fields use their own language to talk about the same stuff. And I think that's probably closer to the reality, and I think a definition is important. And I will be talking to you about that and a whole range of other things. I don't intend to tell you everything there is to know about resilience. It's probably going to be a bit of an eclectic collection, really as much to stimulate conversation. If I'm not mistaken, we've got until 5 o'clock. I won't talk anything like that long. I'd get far too dry. I do have some water to keep me from getting dry on one side, but I think talking that long would be way beyond your capacity and beyond my speaking. So I'm going to cover three things, really, in general. One is who we are and the kind of research we do, why we do the things we do. I'm going to talk about some of the specific research we do, in particular, how to go about measuring resilience, why it's important, and contextualize it so you don't think it is something that it's not, which I've had some of my colleagues think, oh, you can't measure it, you can't specify how big it is, and so we'll talk a bit about that. And then we'll also talk specifically around some of the work that we've been doing in the critical infrastructure space. Who are we? We've been going since 2004, so this is our 10th year, long before the earthquakes in Christchurch. When we started, really, there was virtually no one doing any research in this area of organizational resilience. Let me be specific. Engineers have been looking at the resilience of physical infrastructure for a long, long time. There have been a lot of psychologists and other sociologists looking at the resilience of individuals for many years, and the same thing in the community resilience space. But the area of organizational resilience was a wasteland. And that's why we decided we would focus on something that no one else was to see how could we help. We're a multidisciplinary group spread across New Zealand. We've got about 30 researchers. That's a combination of mostly PhD students and academic researchers at our university, the University of Canterbury, and at the University of Auckland. We also have professional engineers and geologists and others who also collaborate with us. We collaborate with the Australian government and wherever else we can, really. I mean, our goal is so we can improve the resilience of organizations in reality rather than just in talk. We see it as a synthesis of science, engineering, and business disciplines. So Mark's comment about the interdisciplinary nature is important for us to engage with. So we've got PhD students in civil engineering, geography, geology, psychology, and management. And we work together as a team rather than as simple independent projects. Our focus on public good research, so we're publicly funded by the New Zealand government. And if you go to our website, which you'll see is at the bottom of most of our slides, just down here at the bottom, virtually all of our stuff is available from that website. We believe we deal with all hazards in all organizations. So we're not just focusing on critical infrastructure organizations. We've got resources for SMEs, who are the backbone of most communities and most economies, because they're such a linchpin, even in large organizations' supply chains. So we're concerned with the full spectrum, including government organizations. So we think the things we're learning will be applicable right across the spectrum, but in different ways, because organizations are unique by scale, size, and what they do. Our emerging motto, you might say, is building a better today and a safer tomorrow. Because if we think that if you only focus on the disaster, the next disaster, you're never going to become resilient. Because you're always going to be trying to get ready for something you don't know if or when or its shape. And the reality is, we only get good when we practice that. And we only hope that we're never going to have to practice again in Christchurch with the earthquakes we had. Or New York only hopes it's never going to have to deal in New Jersey with another Sandy. So we're not going to get much practice at that. So we need to find other ways to get a lot of practice so we can develop the competencies we need so when the big one does hit, we're ready and we can be as ready as we can. So critical infrastructure in Christchurch, I thought it would be useful to situate things just a little bit, because for the last nearly 3 years, we've been pretty preoccupied with what has happened in our city. Some of you will know about that. Some of you, it's probably fallen off your radar. It absolutely has not fallen off our radar, though, because we are living in the middle of it. If you weren't aware, in September of 2010, we had a large earthquake. It was our big one, we thought. And then about 6 months later, the real big one hit. This is a photograph of that from the Port Hills that run along the edge of Christchurch. And all that stuff, that's about, I'm not sure, within 30 seconds or a minute or so after the earthquake struck. And the reason all of that stuff is in the air is a combination of things. One is the high level of liquefaction that affected the city, which is water and silt boiling up onto the surface as a result of the shaking, collapsing buildings, but just by themselves you wouldn't have seen that. It was the high level of what they call peak ground acceleration. It's the way the land moves like this. And as far as we know, it was the second strongest vertical peak ground acceleration in human history, the largest being the Tohoku earthquake a month after ours. So exceeded 2 gravities. So if you were standing at the epicenter, that means 2 gravities. 1 gravity is what holds you down. So anything over 1 gravity would knock you off your feet. 2 gravities would launch you into the air, so you've been thrown off your feet in the air. And that's what's happening here. All of that silt and dust from the collapsing buildings is being accelerated up into the air. And it was frightening and devastating. Critical infrastructure. This was the outcome of the first earthquake. You won't be running a train on that for a little while until you straighten that out, will you? Here you're seeing the liquefaction, all of this gray stuff in these playing fields. All of the reason you can't see the road surface here is because it's covered, in some cases, by almost a meter of water and silt. Some of the outcomes from that is this. Your roads end up with massive holes in them because all of the underpinnings have been washed out by the silt coming to the surface, and then the road surface either collapsing under its own weight or some vehicle driving over it unsuspectingly and dropping into the hole. You can only imagine what the condition of the pipes, pumps, wires, and anything else that runs underneath that road are. So we have a lot of damage to our infrastructure, and we're in the process of fixing it. The recovery is underway, which is a nice thing to say now after 3 years of repeated large earthquakes. So unfortunately, it wasn't just a single point event, one earthquake and then, a few aftershocks. We've had 4 large earthquakes. And the last count, something like 12,000 aftershocks. They are tailing off now, which is quite nice. People are becoming somewhat less anxious in Christchurch. Some of the good points. The reason I put that slide up is that's our student volunteer army. Within a week or 2 of the first earthquake, we had 2,000 students from our university on the streets of our city helping the neighborhoods clean themselves up. Because, of course, you couldn't get your car out. The car is buried in a half a meter of silt. if your house has gone like this because the underpinnings of your foundation's been washed out, and 1,000 other things. No food because the food distribution system broke down, not for very long, but for a while. A whole host of things, and these young people and a lot of other people pitched in to help. It's something we call social capital. How many of you know that term? Some of you do. It'll become more familiar before I finish today. What do we mean by organizational resilience? So yes, we do have a definition. That is our definition, okay? And you'll note that it's simple because we decided we were going to make it easy to get a hold of. So in about 30 seconds, we could explain what we're talking about. It wouldn't matter whether it's a man on the street or CEO of a major corporation who is very tight on their time. They just don't have 25 minutes to define something. So you'll note that definition's got two parts to it. The ability to survive a crisis, that's the first part. Crisis we're using in the biggest sense, catastrophe, emergency, but all hazards. So it doesn't matter whether it's a global financial crisis, a major flood or storm, a failure in your supply chain, or a critical employee dying or quitting. All of those things can put an organization into a real tailspin and can be life-threatening for that organization. That's the first part. That's the part that we usually think about if you're thinking much about emergency management and that kind of thing, business continuity, those sorts of things. The second part is equally important and in some ways more important, and that is thriving in a world of uncertainty. Because we don't get much practice in the first part, we're going to have to learn how to practice the second part so that we learn to become effective at dealing with day-to-day changes and building the competencies that we can effectively apply when the big one does happen. Okay? Practice makes perfect. You're not going to get real good at it any other way. So, two parts to the definition. Our model, we've got a model. It's taken us a while to figure it out. And in collaboration with our colleagues at the Attorney General's office in Australia. So we work with them fairly closely. Leadership and culture, 3 attributes. Leadership and culture, networks, and change ready. And our fundamental model has got 13 indicators, which we measure. That's the basis on which we get some sense of how resilient the organization is and can begin to think about how we improve their resilience in practical ways. But these things are not independent of one another. It's a problem with any two-dimensional model or any physical model at all. It's never going to tell you all of the details and the ins and the outs and the complexities that you're dealing with. 5 of our indicators associated with leadership and culture attribute leadership. A critical one, staff engagement. Are your staff on board with you? Are they not? Effective decision making, situation awareness, and innovation and creativity. 4 of them associated with networks. Effective partnerships, that's mostly the external side, okay? Formal and informal arrangements, friendships, people who, if you phone them at 4 a.m. when you're in the poo, they will get up at 4:01 and give you a hand. Okay, that could be a formal arrangement, but usually formal arrangements are a waste of time unless the informal arrangements, that social capital is substantive. They'll say, yeah, I'm really sorry to hear that. I'll phone you back when I get up in the morning at 8 a.m. If you haven't got a strong relationship with that person. Internal resources, if you're too cut to the bone, if you've become too ensconced with just-in-time efficiency, performance orientation, which are all important. I'm not running them down. I think they are important. But if you exercise them too close to the bone, let's say, you're not going to have any spare resources, and it's going to be pretty hard to respond to a rapidly changing environment as a consequence. Leveraging your knowledge. Related to the second one, breaking silos. Actually, we're probably going to change that to something slightly different. The silos are terrific from an efficiency standpoint, but they're not so good from an effectiveness standpoint sometimes. So we think silos within organizations, within industries, between sectors need to be more porous than they are, because if they were more effective at sharing their knowledge, sharing their opportunities and difficulties, we would all be a lot safer. We'd be better off today, and we'd be safer in the future. And so finding ways to build that without cutting across needful competition. So I think cooperation can cohabit with competition under the right circumstances. I guess is probably how I would describe that. And then being change ready, this is the space where most planning sits. So if you're in the emergency management space, which critical infrastructure protection often is situated there from a multidisciplinary standpoint or a business continuity. You'll see things that make a lot of sense to you over there, planning strategies, stress testing plans, but other things also, being proactive as a part of your culture. So we could actually move that one up here, but that would be true of a number of the other ones. They do overlap with one another, so don't put too much of a finger on that one. Another perspective on our model is how you apply it. So a common way, because we deal with a lot of emergency managers and people working in the risk management space and business continuity, they would be wearing that lens when they look at it, okay? So they'd be wearing an emergency management or business continuity lens. Of course, you could look at it from a strategic lens, and these things should inform one another, but they both have the problem that I've already highlighted, which is you don't get a lot of practice at either of those. It's this one we get the most practice at, the operational side. So we need to learn how to repurpose some of our operational processes in ways that are going to improve our resilience, not just improve our efficiency and other related aspects. So the models are broadly applicable. Other aspects surrounding this broad picture of how we view resilience, another way of cutting it, is recognizing resilience as a planned aspect and an adaptive capacity aspect. It's got both of those. The problem often is the planned side gets overdone and the adaptive capacity side gets underdone. We treat them like they're 50-50, and based on the international literature and our research so far, the planned part probably accounts for 10 to 15% of an organization's resilience. I'm not saying all the rest is in adaptive capacity, but there's a big chunk of it there. Our model, we think, accounts for maybe 50%, which means we still have a ways to go. We still have a few things to learn. Some of that may be hiding under the surface in terms of interrelationships between some of the elements. We will continue to box on to learn what those missing bits are. Resilience is typified by 20/20 situation awareness. You need to know what's going on. Not just out there, but in here. And inside is often the biggest problem because of management hierarchies and culture, meaning that often the top doesn't talk to the bottom of the hierarchy. And therefore the substance of the knowledge is often weak, and we see that in some of the research that we've done. I'll mention some of those to you as we go along. Effective vulnerability management, in the broadest sense, important. Building that agile, adaptive capacity, and having a world-class culture and leadership, a resilient, a culture that encourages resilience rather than slapping you down when you take a risk. So there's a balance in that, and in cultures, such cultures can be created. They do exist, just not in most of our organizations. So can we measure resilience? Can we measure its improvement?